older sister, Sarah. A clever and sociable girl, Reynard enjoyed poetry and reading. Her favorite play was Under Milk Wood by Dylan Thomas, and she had big dreams of becoming a writer in adulthood. In her teens, she attended St. Joseph of Cluny Secondary School, where she achieved high marks on her junior certificate. She went on to complete her leaving certificate in June of 1999, before finishing school and starting a part-time job at Sally West, a boutique located in the Dun Laoghaire shopping centre. Although she enjoyed her job, Reynard planned to resit her leaving certificate exam so she could gain a higher score. She wanted to attend the arts faculty in University College, Dublin. While Reynard's group of friends were mostly considered goths, she was known to stand out amongst them with her light blonde hair, more colourful clothing, and her blue nose stud. At the time of her death in 1999, she was popular and well-liked, with no known enemies, and the crime sent shockwaves through the local community. On the evening of September 3rd, Reynard finished up her shift at Sally West at around 9:40 p.m. Following this, she headed over to Scott's Pub on George Street, where her friends were enjoying drinks and waiting for her arrival. Between 11:25 and 11:40 p.m., the 17-year-old left the pub to return home temporarily. She wanted to get changed before the group headed to Paparazzi's Disco on the top floor of the Dun Laoghaire shopping centre. While Reynard's home was just 15 minutes away from her location, she didn't arrive back. Between 11:50 p.m. and 12:20 a.m., she was placed by a reliable witness on the Glenageary Road Upper, where she was seen fighting with a man. Nearby witnesses, reportedly a group of teenagers, heard a female voice saying, "Leave me alone," and "Go away," all of which was followed by a scream. Afterwards, it quietened down, so nobody went to investigate the situation. Reynard's sister, Sarah, was on her way home from her own evening out, around 12:20 a.m., when she and her friends came across a girl's body. A split second later, they realized it was Reynard. She was just 50 yards from her home. The 17-year-old had not been robbed or sexually assaulted, but had been stabbed around 30 times. Most of the wounds were insignificant and superficial, barely piercing her clothing, but 4 in particular made a massive impact. They'd penetrated her side, chest, armpit, and shoulder, and one of these had hit an artery, resulting in massive blood loss. It is believed Reynard staggered about 200 feet before she collapsed, and although the murder weapon has never been found, it has been described as a double-edged 6-inch blade that was likely a butcher's knife, or one used by caterers. There were defensive wounds on the 17-year-old's left arm, and police theorized that the perpetrator would have fled the scene covered in blood. The horrific and seemingly random crime shocked those who knew her. Who would want Reynard dead? More than 100 Gardaí worked on Reynard's case at its peak, and the initial investigation was led by Chief Superintendent Martin Donnellan, the head of the National Bureau of Crime Investigation. One hiccup in the case, however, was reportedly the local Chief Superintendent, Pat Culhane, who is now deceased, and who wanted to beat Donnellan to an arrest. This would later come to the attention of cold case investigators, who concluded that the issues may have hampered parts of the investigation, but it likely didn't have a severely damaging effect. Within the first decade of the investigation, more than 8,000 people were interviewed, and almost 3,000 statements were taken. There were also 12 arrests over the course of the inquiry, and detectives identified around 22 potential persons of interest. In 2000, just 1 year after the crime had occurred, investigators made a fresh appeal for information from the public. They also appealed for help to the listeners of Morning Ireland, the most listened to radio program in the Republic of Ireland. Every year, Reynard's family put out an appeal for information, and have offered a reward of €190,000 for information that will lead to a conviction in their daughter's case. On the 10th anniversary of Reynard's murder, authorities issued a description of a man and woman with whom they wished to speak. In more recent years, when authorities asked for information, they hope that witnesses who may have been young at the time are now mature enough to come forward with what they know. Around 2009, investigators had a forensic profile of the perpetrator created. It suggested that the culprit was a young man in his mid to late 20s, living alone or with his mother, and that he was single. He would also be a loner with a possible drug problem and may have spent some time in psychiatric care. He would likely have a history of antisocial behavior, and it was unlikely that he had had any intimate relationships. It was probable that he would strike again. The year before this, in 2008, a unit of experienced Gardaí called the Garda Serious Crime Review Team, working under Superintendent Christy Mangan, began to review the case. It was here they discovered the rivalry between Pat Culhane and Martin Donnellan, and they identified a number of other mistakes and oversights that had occurred during the original investigation. Reportedly, some potential witnesses who came forward with information at the time were not correctly followed up with, and the rivalry between the two chief superintendents led to a lack of clear communication between Garda units. Furthermore, there were also irregularities in a statement by a particular witness, who alleged that their statement was forged, as investigators had lost the original. During the course of this cold case investigation, however, the team were able to recommend renewed searches for the murder weapon, and came up with several interesting new angles in the case. They suggested that the crime was not the work of a random killer, but that Raynid knew the perpetrator. They came to this conclusion after noting there had been no similar attacks in the years before or after the teenager's murder in the Dublin region. They suggested that she was killed after a personal disagreement caused the teenager to break off communication, or that the attacker was someone who held a personal grudge of another nature. They also theorized that the perpetrator was possibly a woman. Some speculated that this was because so many of the knife stabs had been so weak. Notably, female DNA was found beneath Raynid's fingertips, but this could have just been something she picked up while interacting with customers at work. Over 50 women have been ruled out as a match to this DNA. Using this information, investigators were able to pin down a woman who they thought could be involved in Raynid's case. The woman, who has never been named by law enforcement, has family ties to the IRA and was part of the teenager's friend group. She was reportedly known for her jealous streak and aggressive behavior, and friends felt she could be responsible because Raynid was more intelligent and more popular than her. Interestingly, it is believed that she was in a relationship at the time of the murder, and rumors suggested that her boyfriend had some sort of obsession with Raynid. This may have led to a fracturing of the relationship between the woman and Raynid, and the couple may have harbored resentment for the teenager. Although both parties were questioned in relation to the case, they both claimed they were innocent, and the woman's DNA did not match that which was found beneath Raynid's fingernails, although the boyfriend's appearance did somewhat line up with the description given of the man who was seen with the 17-year-old on the night of her death. The woman apparently now lives abroad. She left Ireland about 1 year after the crime. Interestingly, she was reportedly the first to tell their shared friend group that Raynid was dead. It is unclear if she told them before or after this information had been made public. However, this woman was not the only possible person of interest in the case. In fact, many more were identified by detectives over the years. The earliest suspect in the case was a man described as being in his mid-20s, with sandy-coloured hair, in a similar style to Oasis frontman Liam Gallagher. He stood at around 5'10" and wore light-coloured combat trousers and a beige top. This is the man who was seen arguing with Raynid on the night of the crime. It has been noted that this man also bears a resemblance to one who was seen dancing with her at a nightclub on July 29th of 1999. This man was described as being in his late teens or early 20s, and was slim with spiky hair, wore reading glasses on his head, and spoke with a, quote, posh accent. He and Raynid had hit it off in the club and went to a fast food restaurant afterwards. According to one report, he was witnessed hassling her there. Later that same night, Raynid turned up at the house of a friend, seemingly agitated. She told her friend that someone was following her, and she wouldn't leave until her taxi had arrived to collect her. However, the teenager never elaborated on the situation, and never spoke of it again. It is unknown if the person following her was the man she was seen dancing with, and it's also unclear if the man she was dancing with is the same one seen with her at the time of her murder. Other suspects in the case include a butcher with a history of violence against women, who reportedly bragged about the slaying of Raynid while drunk, a hotel worker who had previously been accused of falsely imprisoning one woman and assaulting another, and a, quote, druggy-type man who was part of a group who held parties in a basement flat near to where Raynid was attacked. He was said to have been obsessed with her. Also worth noting is that the hotel worker claimed he didn't know the teenager, but her friends stated otherwise. 2 other men who reportedly knew Raynid and had histories of violence against women were also investigated. Yet another person of interest was a cook who was discovered with a collection of violent pornography and numerous martial arts weapons, including 2 samurai swords. He was taken in for an interview, but was released when it was found he had a solid alibi for the night in question. Another suspect in the case was Farah Noor, a Kenyan immigrant who was killed and dismembered in March of 2005 by Linda and Charlotte Mulhall, who were later gruesomely dubbed the Scissor Sisters. Linda and Charlotte were 2 sisters from Dublin, and Noor had been dating their mother Kathleen at the time of his death. He had reportedly told Kathleen, quote, "I'm going to fucking kill you, just like I did with Raynid." However, Noor was drunk at the time and was a known fantasist. He also had issues with drugs and alcohol. He was questioned during the original investigation, but was later ruled out. He told law enforcement that he had only said what he had said to instill fear into Kathleen. The final suspect in the case is perhaps the most interesting. He was brought to the attention of law enforcement by a taxi driver who claimed he'd driven a young man with blood on his trousers to his home in the early hours of Saturday morning. The man initially asked to be taken to Granville Road at the top of Newton Park Avenue, but then changed his mind and reportedly gave incoherent instructions, taking the driver on a very long detour before eventually being dropped near his original requested location of Granville Road. The driver reported that the man seemed to linger at his house as if he was waiting for him to leave. A house-to-house search carried out at the time turned up no new leads. Nobody matching the description of the young man was known to live on the street. However, later on in the investigation, this man was identified. He apparently lived on another side of Newton Park Avenue. The taxi driver helped to ID him by picking him out of a photo lineup. When he was located, the man was found carrying a knife. He was a heroin user with a violent temper who had previously been charged with the sexual assault of another teen girl. The man was reportedly known to Raynid and her friends and had a flimsy alibi. He was arrested and questioned in connection with the case, but ultimately no concrete evidence was ever found to link him to Raynid's death. Later, when he was jailed for an unrelated crime, his cellmate came forward and claimed he had admitted to killing the 17-year-old because she'd rejected his sexual advances. However, the man denied these claims, and no proof of his confession was ever found. Perhaps most interestingly of all is that on the 5th anniversary of Raynid's death, her family was sent an anonymous letter. The writer gave the family their condolences and said that they knew the killer, who was questioned early on and dismissed as a person of interest. Authorities managed to track down the writer and, unsurprisingly, it turned out to be the man from the taxi. He claimed that he wrote the note to remove suspicion from himself. Despite his bizarre story and actions, investigators still didn't have enough evidence to confidently charge him with the murder. In August of 2009, Raynid's parents set up a website as both a tribute to their daughter and to generate awareness of her case. Within 3 days, it had garnered 43 pages of messages. While many were positive, a large number were abusive, upsetting, and distressing. Law enforcement said they would look into it, but it is unknown what became of their investigation into who was leaving these horrific messages. Similarly, reportedly in the years following her death, Raynid's grave was repeatedly vandalized. The culprit has never been identified. Raynid was buried on September 7th, 1999. Her funeral was attended by dozens of friends, family members, and classmates. Her father, Jim, Johnson County. The man had been shot twice with a .25 caliber pistol that is described as a Saturday night special, a slang term which refers to a weapon that is inexpensive, compact, and of poor quality. Investigators also said the weapon was ineffective at a distance. The man's cause of death was determined to be the wound to his chest. He had no clothing and no belongings, not on his person nor at the scene. While the man's fingerprints were taken, they didn't provide law enforcement with his name. As a result, he was dubbed Mr. X. Mr. X is described as a white or Hispanic male, originally thought to be between the ages of 30 and 50, with short, curly brown hair. He weighed 110 pounds and is around 5 foot 6 inches tall. He had been dead for a week or less at the time of his discovery. The initial investigation into Mr. X's death proved difficult from the get-go. His remains had been severely damaged by scavenging animals, and some parts of him have never been recovered as a consequence. Furthermore, detectives discovered there were no spent casings at the crime scene, which indicated to them that the young man may have been slain elsewhere. In the 1990s, a reporter claimed they had met with a man who told them the crime was the work of drug dealers for a ride with a friend and would be right back. However, Sabrina never came home again. Tracing the young woman's last steps, the police discovered that on the night of her disappearance, Sabrina had gone out with her ex-boyfriend, Kevin Crozier. The couple had previously lived together in Crozier's grandmother's house at 11 Dixfield Road, but Sabrina had moved out on December 13th. According to Crozier, the couple went to a friend's house on the night of the 21st and got drunk. A friend drove them back to the Dixfield residence where they went inside. Crozier then passed out, and when he awoke, Sabrina was gone. He later told the media, "When I woke up in the morning, she was gone. This has happened before. She took off, I went to church. When I came home, I called her, Facebook messaged her, called her aunt and mum, called her friends. No one had seen her, but this has happened before." Sabrina's life had not been an easy one. Her father died young, and her mother Brenda was involved with drugs and prostitution. Over the course of her life, Brenda had been in the state correctional systems 13 times, for as long as a year and as little as a day. She was brought in for charges such as shoplifting, larceny, drugs, prostitution, and giving a false name. During her childhood, Brenda had been exposed to domestic abuse and had become involved with violent men as an adult. Her daughter Sabrina ended up carrying on the cycle of abuse. While Sabrina's siblings were adopted, she was raised by relatives. In one particular home, she was sexually abused at the age of 7. At age 14, she became pregnant by a classmate and gave birth at 15. She became a mother again at 19. Her children are still being cared for by relatives. According to Brenda, the pair often argued, but it was uncharacteristic for Sabrina to leave without warning and not keep in touch with the family. Relatives added that she never missed her children's birthdays or other special events. At the time of Sabrina's disappearance, Brenda stated that she was trying tough love with her daughter. On January 1st, 2015, the Dixfield Road residence was set alight and burned down. Firemen on the scene reported that there were no bodies inside the home. A few months later, in March, Crozier and 2 other men, Scott T. Fallon, 1990s, were chock-a-block with some of the world's most high-profile crimes that are still discussed even today. In 1996, there was the murder of Tupac Shakur and John Bennett Ramsey. A year later, we saw the death of fashion icon Gianni Versace. And in 1998, Saturday Night Live favorite Phil Hartman was shot to death by his own wife. Perhaps the most notable crime of the year 1999 was the Columbine High School massacre, which overshadowed many of the other missing of Homewood Avenue that night. Some reports claim the two were seen at 10 p.m., while others state they were seen around 11. The mother and son pair were in the company of Nichelle's ex-boyfriend, Antoine Anderson. 4 days passed before Zayden and his mother were reported missing by Nichelle's mother. She discovered that Nichelle had not turned up to her shifts at either of her 2 jobs, and concerned, she contacted the authorities. When law enforcement officers began looking into the case, they knew they needed to start with Nichelle's ex, and so they attempted to contact him, but to no avail. Anderson had active warrants out for his arrest, and authorities tried to pull him over at a traffic stop, but he fled from the car and ran into a nearby wooded area. Reportedly, 6 shots were fired by police officers after they chased him into the trees and engaged in a shootout with Anderson. The gunfire ended when Anderson turned his gun on himself and took his own life. On April 10th, the police searched Stillwater Trail. A day later, an anonymous caller, who claimed to be a friend of Anderson's, directed the police to search behind the Riverview Park apartments in the 4300 block of Riverside Drive, near the Stillwater River. Here they found Nichelle's body. She had been shot twice in the head. One report from the Dayton Daily News stated that the preliminary autopsy results showed the 25-year-old likely died on the 27th, but authorities seem to agree today that it's more likely she died immediately after she went missing. There was no sign of Zayden where his mother's body was found. On April 30th, a 29-year-old woman named Tanisha Harris was arrested and charged with 1 count of failure to report a crime, 1 count of evidence tampering, and 2 counts of gross abuse of a corpse in both Nichelle's case and in Zayden's presumed death. Authorities discovered evidence in the 29-year-old's apartment, including blood. She resided in the 20 block of Birchwood Avenue. Investigators believed that the blood indicates both Nichelle and Zayden died there. Also in the home, detectives discovered the shoes Nichelle was last seen wearing, along with her bank cards, driver's license, and social security cards for both her and her son. Harris had also dated Anderson and had reportedly used Nichelle's bank cards without her permission shortly before she vanished. She spent almost $3,000 using them. Authorities believe that she used the cards at Anderson's instruction and that Nichelle found out about this around the time of her disappearance. It has been speculated that she was killed after she confronted her ex-boyfriend. In October of 2015, Harris pled guilty to evidence tampering and failure to report a crime and no contest to the gross abuse of a corpse. She was sentenced to 3 years behind bars, with 4 years being the maximum sentence. While detectives believe that she cleaned blood out of her basement and the trunk of her car, and think she was intimately involved in the murder, Harris has never confessed and vehemently denies being involved. She has never been charged in connection with the homicides themselves. In 2015, she apologized to the McKnight family and stated, "I am so serious. If I knew where Zayden was, I promise I would tell you guys. Because I feel like this, like what you guys have been through as a family, that's the least I could do, is give that information." In the years since the crime, several efforts have been made to find Zayden, but all have been fruitless. Investigators do not believe he's alive, given the circumstances of the case. Zayden McKnight was just 4 years old when he vanished on the night of March 25, 2014. He was last seen with his mother and her ex-boyfriend in the 600 block of Homewood Avenue in Dayton, Ohio. Zayden is described as a black male with brown hair and brown eyes. He was 3 feet tall and weighed 45 pounds when he was last seen. At the time of his disappearance, he was wearing a yellow